Welcome to this new episode of the Studio Data. We're at the Jaarbeurs in Utrecht for the Big Data Expo. And I have two guests today that are going to talk with us about forecasting, but also to how to set up a data science project. Welcome. Welcome. Today we have Jeroen Franse from Sogeti working at KLM and Dimitris Stafylarakis from Linkit also working at KLM. Welcome, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you here. Let's talk about data science projects.
Great.
Let's talk how to approach them, how to structure them, how to run them efficiently. You want to take it away, Jeroen?
Good, yeah. So we have a data science team at KLM, at the innovation department, and we're doing this data science project. And this is actually, for me, and I think for everyone in the team, the first time that we get to structure the project exactly the way we want to. And there's a couple of aspects to it. I think the one that I appreciate the most is what's called data-driven decision-making. Of course, data-driven is a term that we're hearing a lot. It's a buzzword. But what I mean in the context of doing a data science project with a Scrum team, essentially, is very specific. Where I'll make a simple example that's not related to data science yet. But data-driven decision-making would be if you're in a store and I see a pair of shoes that I like, and I do not look at the price tag yet. First, I decide what I think is the maximum price I would like to pay for these shoes. Then I look at the price tag, and then automatically the decision is made. I can't go back. I can't change that boundary that I set for myself. Now, of course, when I'm personally in the store, I don't actually do this, but in the project, that is what we do. So we work in phases, of course, Agile, Scrum, like everyone. But when we have these phases or these iterations, we set the boundary conditions, the decision boundaries at the start. And then when we get to the end of the phase, if there's a go, no-go decision, that decision is automatic and you can't change the goalposts anymore after you've kicked the ball. And this really helps us get the scope clear.
So Jeroen, that sounds like the example of at the store that the customer could abstract her emotions out of the equation and just be completely rational and set up this decision boundary. Can you guys in your teams also to abstract these emotions and just be completely rational? What is the translation of this emotion to a team setting?
Yeah, well, that is the goal, to take out some of that emotional decision making. Often, even if you have data, if you give in to the temptation of looking at the data before you've made any sort of rational choices about the boundary, you kind of end up using the data to support the decision you've already made using your gut. So by doing it like this, you force yourself to make a decision, or at least a rationalization, before the emotions come into play too much.
So Jeroen, you are a data scientist, and we also have Dimitris, you are engineer.
Yes.
So how does this removing emotion and affect the work of an engineer in such a project?
I don't really think engineers have any emotions. This is how we grew up. I think for my part, I'm looking more about how to support data scientists in their work. So it makes me happy, which is an emotion, to see the whole platform work as it should be and support them in doing their work. As far as the product itself is, I think the way I understand it is that computers also don't have emotions. So in that sense, it's already a step into rationalizing a whole process. Instead of having it abstract in the mind of someone who executes it, then we rely on software that takes a lot of these idiosyncrasies of humans away.
Okay. So maybe you can tell us a bit what kind of setting, what kind of goals you want to achieve with your data projects, to give a bit more context how this way of structuring projects could work.
Do you mean our actual project right now?
Yes.
So that's a forecasting project. It's to support decision making for scheduling. How many people do you need for a given shift? So we're forecasting the amount of work, and then we supply those forecasts, or are going to supply those forecasts to the people who do the planning. So we need to make sure that the forecasts that we make are compatible with how those people make their decisions. That's another part. That's where user research comes in. That's not something that we do very much, like Dimitris and I, but we have a service designer on our team, and he does a lot of user research. So he does interviews, observations, and then really make sure that any information that we create from our whole data science pipeline is interpreted correctly. Or actually, I should put it the other way around, that the way the users interpret it is actually the way we build it.
So you mentioned Scrum, right,
Yeah.
before?
Yeah.
How do you use it? Or because there's always this discussion, right? Like, what is the right methodology to run data projects? Should you go agile? Should you go lean startup, design thinking? So maybe you, Dimitris, what are you doing there at KLM in terms of project management, how to approach a project Scrum?
Well, of course, in every situation, people have their own interpretation of Scrums. In a lot of different teams, you see a different implementation of that. I think we do a pretty straightforward way of tackling it. So we have 2-week-long sprints. We have Scrum Masters, Product Owners, so the typical roles that you find in a Scrum team. Yes, and for the rest, we also make sure that our set of skills is also supporting each other in order to get a good result in the end. So we have engineering skills, science, data science skills, and all the other skills necessary to have a product in the end. We have them all in the same team.
This working in sprints, how does it work? Does it work for all sorts of projects, or only for one sort of project, more experimental or less experimental? How do you see it?
I think Scrum works for most types of projects, and I think it's worth taking the effort to make it work for your project as well, because it helps organizing your workflow, and it helps working on the same thing as a team. For data science, if you're in a phase, because we've also had that phase where there's more experimentation going on, really on the data science side, Scrum isn't. Scrum could even be a little bit too restrictive in the user stories, and that you set for 2 weeks. So you might even need to be more agile than Scrum. But I don't think you'll ever be less agile than Scrum.
Also for tasks like, usually it comes to business request. We have a challenge, can you help me? And then you need to do a bit of research, like, is there data? How good is the data? Is there value in the data? And
Yeah.
how do you approach these situations that is the duration of the action is uncertain? How do you fit it in your Scrum?
Yeah. So the Scrum part is pretty easy. Yeah? You just do a sprint every 2 weeks. But the question is, when do you stop doing more sprints, right? Because that's the biggest question. We can start with one sprint, exploring if there is data, where is the data, what's the quality, can we use it, that kind of stuff. Maybe that takes one sprint, but maybe it takes 2 sprints. So it depends a bit on the budget, I guess. In general, I would say you can make a roadmap that's sort of accurate, maybe 2 months ahead, but not much more. So that's where the agile part comes in. If your roadmap is a little bit longer, then you have to be prepared to make some changes according to what you find. But it's because you have the sort of the elementary part of the sprint, you're still organized, and it's not just open-ended.
So I guess Scrum is not the only thing that makes a project successful. So what are other ingredients you see in your practice to lead a successful data project? Dimitris.
So I will relate it again to Scrum a little bit, in the sense that what I see that we do well here is that we're not very dogmatic about this. So we follow Scrum, we follow the rituals, but we are also able to see if we need more of a certain thing in one occasion, like we need a bigger retro then we do it. We need a smaller retro, we still do it. So it's not that we just stick to the formalities. And also, but we make sure that we identify what is important for our team and our project, and we protect that. So, for example, we wouldn't overcommit. We see how we can deliver at least the minimum valuable product, and not more than that, also not less than that. And this is something that the whole team is conscious about. I think apart from the formalities, everybody realizing what's the essence of their role and trying to do that well, I think that's important.
Dimitris, what other things have made your project successful? What are those secret ingredients in your recipe to run a successful project?
So our project is not yet completely done. I think we're now entering a productionalizing phase. So we cannot yet speak about a final definitive success. But I think up to now it has worked really well. We have a phase where it's a proof of concept phase, and there we show that we have certain criteria that we need to meet in order to go on. Otherwise, it's a no-go. And we did a very good demo for that. That was my first day, I think, with the team when they presented a killer demo about the proof of concept. So I think customers was happy, team was happy, I was happy with seeing such a nice presentation. So I think in that sense, up to now, we are quite on a successful path.
So you say you started with a proof of concept, like most data projects, and now you're at the stage where you're close to production. So there's always a big gap, right? To go from proof of concept into a product you can deliver. How did you bridge that gap, that chasm between the experimental part into this has value, let's productionize it?
Yeah, we're still bridging the gap at the moment. I think we're making very good progress, but I think Dimitris is actually better at answering this question.
So of course, a lot of the trouble comes from having the proof of concept running successfully on someone's laptop, and then how do you transfer this to an organization, which a bigger corporate organization has certain requirements, and that's the challenge. What we try to do is to be very transparent about the next steps, because our project eventually will be transferred to another team. We are part of the digital studio of KLM, which is an innovation center. And eventually the product, when it is at the end of the MVP phase, it will be carried over to another team outside of our digital studio for further development maintenance. So we already want to make sure that this transfer is as smooth as possible. So we want to make transparent to the stakeholders what are the different options about inheriting afterwards the product in terms of support, operational support, for example. What are the necessary skills you need? And then we decide already for a long time before we actually do the handover how we're going to transfer the skills, how we're going to create a team if it's not there, how we're going to train this team. So this is something that we actively take up now. We're looking at least a year ahead for this.
Timeline of 1 year from you have a solid experiment that you want to deliver to production takes around 1 year.
It takes a year to prepare the rest of the organization to take over the product.
Because people always think, well, once it's just technique, right? Like I just need to arrange a platform and I just need to arrange some CI/CD. But there's way more to that. People need to know how to use it, trainings, awareness, change processes. So that's the human factor, right?
I think it's always a human factor.
Yes.
Computers may be stupid, but they just do exactly what you tell them. So all the troubles, at least in my experience in the IT sector, are basically due to humans.
So we have made a proposition, and we have walked around here at the Big Data Expo, asking people, what do you think about this proposition? I think it's quite relevant. Shall we have a look at it, and then we can discuss it?
That's good.
Ik zal in eerste instantie de data gebruiken om zelf de beslissing te nemen. Maar als ik zie dat het repeteert, oftewel dat het eigenlijk programmeerbaar wordt, dan zal ik het wel overlaten daarna aan het systeem.
In principe wil ik altijd hetzelfde vinger erop leggen. Tenzij ik precies weet hoe het automatisch ingeregeld is. Dus ik wil tot in detailniveau weten of we het zelf geprogrammeerd moeten hebben. Het script hebben geschreven moeten hebben. Wat dan de uitkomst zal geven. In dat geval, dan weet ik wat het script doet. En dan zou ik zeggen, oké, op dit moment kan ik het volledig vertrouwen. Maar een script van een ander, of van een partij dat het geschreven heeft, vind ik heel lastig. Dan zou ik zelf onderzoek doen of zelf naar de visualisatie kijken van klopt het wel.
So the proposition was something along the lines of, I prefer to make decisions based on visualizations, do decisions myself, instead of letting an automatic system decide for me. Dimitris, you want to take it away?
I think the way I understand, I think I agree with the points that they were covered there. The way they were mentioned is that you really need to understand what you're trying to automate and then automate it. And once you have that, then it's easier to have trust in the system. So not just have a system and just give it to the users and say trust this. I think that's what we're also trying to achieve with the service designer. But okay, as I said, I'm more of an engineer side. Maybe it's a data science question.
Dimitris, do you mean that the data team needs to understand what the user does, or the user needs to understand how the system is built?
I think, Jeroen?
A little bit of both, but actually mostly the data scientists need to understand how the people work. Otherwise, I don't think you can convince people to exactly interpret the system the way you've thought of it, or the way you've designed it. So it has to be both directions in that sense.
So this is important, right? The skills that the data scientists and also the engineers need to develop to have interest in the problem you're solving, not just in the tool you use to solve it.
As an engineer, I can say that this does not only apply to data products. So it has happened a lot of times that I'm building an engineering solution which is used by someone else. I always need to understand the way they're going to use it, because I may have a certain use case in my head, but it doesn't necessarily mean that someone else will use it like that. And they always find ways to surprise us with their creativity, let's say.
Jeroen, then we talk a lot about the project itself, how to run the project. How does the team look like? What kind of expertises and professionals do you have to go from proof of concept into a production solution?
Exactly, yeah. So we have a team of 8 people at the moment. We have a service designer, as I already mentioned, product owner, scrum master, 2 data engineers, and 3 data scientists. I think this is a really nice makeup for the team. It covers all the bases. I also think it's important to really get people to be able to do the things that they're best at and enjoy the most. So we have our 5 technical people. They have different expertise, so they're complementary to each other, but they still understand what each of them is doing. But we've been careful in our selection process so that everyone complements each other, but also kind of naturally we pick up the things that we enjoy most and therefore usually are also best at, and the other things are picked up by the other people.
So in a previous talk today, we discussed the concept of tech push and business pull, right? So technology-minded people see possibilities, what you can achieve with technology, develop a prototype, and then present it to the business. The other hand is business request a solution for a current problem. Since you are working in an innovation center, how do you balance that mix of look at what we can do for you, which is very disruptive, versus what do you need, and maybe it's not so disruptive?
I think that's actually the most difficult thing about this entire innovation department. I think there are a couple methods that we use to bridge that gap. One of them is the user research that I already mentioned. So even if there's a business request from a stakeholder, that doesn't necessarily mean that the users have made the request. Or of course, if there's a push from the technology side, which sometimes makes sense because not everyone knows what is possible with the new technologies. It's really about the users. In the end, if the users don't like it, it's not going to be used, regardless of how useful it actually is. So that user research is very important, not just for understanding, not just for the understanding of the development team, but also to make the users feel like it's being done for them. And not just making them feel like it's for them, it's just to actually make it for them. I think that's one of the most important things. And then there's also the data-driven decision making that I just mentioned. And that really helps to bring the stakeholders and the developers together. The developers who know what is possible and the stakeholders who know what they want. And with the data-driven decision making, you get everyone closer together so that everyone understands better what each side wants of each other and what decisions will have to be made at which point. So you force everyone together.
To also come to an agreement, what the goal is. So Dimitris, from a technology perspective, this discussion, technology, push, business pull, how do you see it?
It's always a bit difficult to discuss this on the infrastructure part because a lot of times you see that this is viewed as a necessary evil. So basically we want the end product, but all the other things that come infrastructure-wise, these are things that we basically as business don't want to deal with. We have to pay for it. The less we pay, the better. So this is the viewpoint. And then, of course, there are the from us as technical people, we see a lot of possibilities because this is a booming field now. So it's always difficult to persuade that we have to invest in new ways of handling infrastructure, for example. So I think one very good, one enabling factor is that we can do rapid prototyping. We can try things out quickly without a lot of investment in time and money. We see then what fits, what works the best, and then move from there. So for me, it's very important to be able to show what is the powerful, what's the value of each thing, and then of course to reach the right audience for that. So this way we have a bit of a balance. We find what works, what not, from both sides. We come to an agreement.
Thank you. We've almost come to the end of this interview. Thank you very much for being here. Do you have some parting thoughts for our viewers, maybe related to project management or data-driven decision-making?
Yeah, the data-driven decision-making. I really recommend everyone to look into it. There's some very good articles on the internet about it, but you can try doing it in your personal life to get a little bit of a feel for it. It's not actually that difficult when you get down to it. And for the project, it really worked wonders for us. So that's I think what I would like to leave with you.
Thank you.
And for me, I think what I find important is to seek happiness. I mean, we're all in this together. There's a lot of challenges, and it can be very stressful. But I think success comes by having everybody happy in the end.
Dimitris, Jeroen, thank you for being here. I was your host, Julio, and this was Studio Data at the Big Data Expo. Thank you very much.